You probably couldn't hear me, that's why you laugh. I like them tall. Even they yellow.
Hold on, I'm working on something real quick.
Okay.
I'm loading my sounds because I couldn't hit a shot. Alright, let's go.
My section ridiculous. Watch where you stepping. Why when I go live, freaking I Run You goes live?
Who's I running?
The guy with like 80,000 subs.
Probably watches you. Never know.
Imagine.
Hello, MMS used to be all the time. Again, subscribe to the channel.
Oh, I need to put that.
Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Oh, nice call.
I mean, can you tell I'm on clock? Or does it look like I'm doing a little bit too good to just start out?
Yeah, like that. Ah, bud, I went for the cone and I died. Build a wall!
My stairs. Okay, I'm back. Yeah, I'm lagging triplets. Keep lagging. Of course they will go upstairs and watch Netflix. Where'd you go?
What ping are you at?
80.
How you at 80, but I'm at 40?
I don't know. Dang it. Oh my god, I'm stuck on my edit. You bought. You gonna shoot a guy down that's on his first day of claw?
That was my bad, right? Get out my box!
That,
What the hell was
bruh.
that?
Come on, bruh.
What the hell is that? Are you serious?
My section ridiculous. Watch where you stepping. Shh. My section ridiculous. Watch where you stepping. I like them tall. And when they're yellow.
Did you leave?
Nah, I was AFK just sitting in a box. trying to get the hang of this. Should I rotate my wrist? Hope it. BRB. Let's see.
All of the people questioning right now. Questioning.
Hashtag YouTube videos. Always helps.
Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. In today's video, I've put together 7 tips you need to know when learning Claw. This is the most requested video I get asked in my stream.
Don't laugh at me. You know I'm out here watching YouTube videos on how to learn how to be a better Claw.
Mentality, and then moving into the physical aspect about the practicality of holding.
Did I hit you?
A few things in this video I've mentioned in my How to Claw video. So if you haven't watched that, I highly recommend
He has
you do.
he has
It's
big
currently the best
fingers.
How to Claw video on YouTube, and the feedback from it has been insane. But just before the video starts, if you guys could drop a like and subscribe if you're new. Claw is and why people play it, so you know if it's even worth it for you to swap. So Claw, as you all know, is when you bring your index fingers up off the triggers onto the D-pad and action buttons. The reason people switch to Claw is so they are able to do more things with the controller than someone who doesn't. So as a standard player, you only have 4 or 6 fingers on the controller at once, and you have to take your right thumb off the analog stick each time you want to press an action button, such as jump, reload, switch mode, or pull out pickaxe. Even if you have custom binds, you still have to take your thumb off the analog stick to perform certain tasks, which means you have to reposition your thumb, and this could result in missing a shot or losing a fight. Whereas a Claw player has 6 or 8 fingers on the controller at once, and never has to take their thumb off the analog stick, resulting in better overall aim, as you build a lot more solid muscle memory, keeping your thumb in one place. So you have access to the analog sticks, the action buttons, and the triggers all at once, which results in a smoother gameplay. Having your index finger locked into pressing R1 is like telling a keyboard player to have their index finger to only press one key. They'll manage, but it'll be a lot better if they could have the freedom of pressing multiple buttons. So now is it even worth swapping to Claw? It's straight facts that it makes you a better player quicker. Like there are some pro players who use Scuff or don't play Claw, but as you may have heard of, most pro players do play Claw. I'd say if you play on weekends or have a time limit to how much you can play, then I don't recommend Claw, as it may not be worth your only time playing just to learn it. But if you play any more than, let's say, 12 hours a week, then I recommend you switch to Claw, as it takes a lot less time than you think to actually learn. And once learned, can be carried through your entire gaming life, and you'll always have an advantage on every new game that comes out, as they may not allow custom controller binds. Tip number 2 is consistency. This is by far the single most important tip. The number one thing I get asked is what are some tips for playing Claw, and it's always the same answer. Just be consistent with it. This goes for anything in life you want to learn. It doesn't happen overnight, but if you're consistent with it, it will happen as quick as can be. People always want that one secret to get something and get it quickly, and most good things don't come quickly. But believe it or not, Claw comes a lot quicker than you think. If you just play creative edit courses and practice certain builds with Claw, you'll have it in no time. Speaking of edit courses, I just made the most beautiful 5-minute edit course in my latest video that's actually doing really well. Tip that correlates with the last one is patience. We're starting off with the most important tips first. I know they may seem boring, but when you're learning something new, no matter what it is in life, you have to deploy patience. It's something that most of us suck at.
I'm gonna just free build real quick.
Quite a long time, like getting a good body or saving up for something. But patience
I'm free building.
is absolute key when learning anything new. And the good news is, you don't even need that much patience when learning Claw. I tell most people that with 2 hours a day, each day in creative, practicing necessary builds and edits, you'll have Claw down in a week. 1 week and you'll be playing Claw. You're not instantly going to become a god of the game because you have to put in hours to be a god, but to swap to Claw, 2 hours a day for 1 week, that's all it takes. I promise you. Tip number 4 is transitioning. In my How to Claw video, I talked about the transitional period and how long it takes to go from not playing Claw to playing Claw. And I mentioned when learning Claw, grind creative and edit courses, but when you go into pubs, if things get too hard for you to remember your Claw controls in a fight, just play how you used to play, finish the fight, then return to Claw. We all know for a fact that when you change a keybind, it may take some time to get used to it, which will result in choking in fights and not knowing what to press. A good way to practice Claw is to grab a group of friends and play squads, so it's not so stressful, and maybe you can sit back with an AR and help your squad rather than having to fight people close quarters. So while you're in that transitional week, try and stick to creative, but if you do play pubs, just remember that you may choke in fights, but it doesn't last forever. You will get used to it. Tip number 5 is wrist rotation. Now that we've covered the more important tips, we can go into the more practical ones. What I mean by rotating your wrist is if you're playing claw normally, you probably are playing like this, or you're probably playing like this, which means if I show your wrist, it's probably sitting naturally like this. And then when people try and play claw, they bring their fingers up and they just can't reach, and there's a lot of strain, and even I can't press those buttons comfortably. But if I rotate my wrist just a little bit slightly, the tiniest bit, I can now press every button with ease. No wrist rotation, I'm straining to press those buttons, but I rotate my wrist, and now I'm pressing the buttons more naturally, and it's a lot easier. No claw players ever explained this until I did. It will still take a bit to get used to, but there is zero pain or strain on my finger, which is why I've been able to play claw for 8 years and my finger be perfectly fine. Tip number 6 is double claw. Now I put this in quotation marks because everyone has fancy terms for what type of claw they play. I'm old school, so back in Black Ops 1 and Modern Warfare 2, claw was just claw. There was no dragon claw, double claw, octopussy claw. But ever since Fortnite, I started hearing the term double claw, which is when you claw the right side and the left.
Yeah.
There was also right hand claw and left hand claw, but that just means you only claw one side. I don't really see the point of this. Like, it's good you're learning claw on one side, but if you're going through all that effort to learn claw, why not learn it on both sides? I see this tip as a no-brainer, but if you're going to learn claw, learn double claw for the obvious reason of giving your index fingers the freedom for both sides. And the last tip, tip number 7, is try different finger placements. Like I explained in my how-to claw video, a lot of pro players will use different fingers for different buttons. So some players will use their middle finger for R2, index finger for R1 and the action buttons, whereas others will use their middle finger for R2 and R1 and let their index finger focus only on the action buttons. And then there's some that will even bring their ring finger onto R2, which means their middle finger goes on R1 and their index finger on the action buttons. So try out a few and see what you like. There's no right or wrong way to play claw, just as long as you're playing claw. If you do want to see how other people play claw, I do advise you to go watch my how to claw video, as I do go over how other pro players hold their controller. But bonus tip, tip number 8, and I changed my mind, this is the most important tip, is subscribe, because there's no other channel that goes more into claw videos or any.
Comment my ass.
When allergies stand in the way, Allegra helps you break through fast. Get back to the moment with Allegra.
Hey, what's up guys?
Are you
Welcome
still
back. In today's video, I've put together 7 tips you need to know when learning claw. This is the most requested video I get asked in my streams, so I thought I'd make a video on some tips that will help you, starting with the facts and mentality, and then moving into the physical aspect about the practicality of holding the controller. A few things in this video I've mentioned in my how to claw video, so if you haven't watched that, I highly recommend you do. It's currently the best how to claw video on YouTube, and the feedback from it has been insane. But just before the video starts, if you guys could drop a like and subscribe if you're new, I'd really appreciate it. 100k is just around the corner, and I have some pretty cool stuff planned for when we hit it, as well as hit that notification bell if you do want to be notified when I post a video or when I live stream. Alright, let's get into the video. So now the first tip is understanding claw. You have to understand
Didn't I
what
just
claw
watch this?
is and why people...
Yeah. Subscribe, right?
I didn't subscribe to that nigga.
So I'm gonna keep it short.
Okay.
Is to be able to move the right analog stick while pressing jump, reload, and pull out builds. And on the left side, edit, inventory, and take the L. The whole point of claw is not taking your thumb off that right analog stick. What this will do is hardwire muscle memory patterns in your brain and make your aim become deadly. Everyone always asks me how I have such good shotgun aim, and this is always because I don't take my thumb off the right analog stick from the minute I get on Fortnite to the minute I get off. You may have noticed when I start my stream, I jump and move around my right analog stick. This is me warming up my aim and reactivating those muscle memory patterns. Also at the start of my stream, I'll jump and do flick shots while farming trees for the same reason. This gets my aim ready for a fight. Now I know people use certain keybinds like R3 to jump, L3 to edit, or whatever, but there are plenty of pro players that have made non-claw controller bind videos, so be sure to check them out. But as far as I remember, this title isn't how to not play claw. This is probably the most important part of claw, yet extremely overlooked. Most people think you just pick up a controller like you always do, then chuck your fingers up and you're done. This right here is a very uncomfortable position for my index fingers. In fact, it almost hurts. As you can see, I can barely press all the buttons. This brings up a big misconception that people think their fingers are too small to play claw. There's no such thing as fingers being too small to play claw. Watch this, ready? If I hold the controller like this and try and press the buttons, I'm straining my finger trying to press those buttons. But if I rotate my wrist just slightly,
That's
all
it.
of a sudden, I can press everything
I forgot who
with
told me
ease.
that. Somebody said
In
your
fact,
fingers
if
are
my
way too
index
slow to
finger
play
was
claw.
cut in half, so I had midget fingers, I'd still be able to press every single button. The slight wrist rotation is key. Now this right here is something huge. Because I've rotated my wrist, if my thumb rotates with it, there would be an analog stick down here facing outwards. But there isn't, so I have to reposition my thumb back up on the analog stick, and this is going to make my aim seem off. Because I'm no longer pulling and pushing in the same direction anymore. Before I was pulling and pushing like this. Now I've changed the angle, I'm now pulling and pushing like this. But it doesn't take long for your brain to relearn that muscle memory. It's not like you're picking up a controller for the first time. You're just taking those movements you've learned and recalibrating them into a different direction. I call this the transitional period. The definition of transitional period is a time in which things are changing from one state to another. In this instance, we're changing from standard grip to claw grip. And I'd say this lasts about a week. Considering we got playground and creative, there's no reason why you can't practice this for a few hours a day. Whether that be target practice in playground or 1v1ing your mates in creative. All practice pays off and all hours add up. The most important
He's
thing is, don't
Australian.
think you have to go from playing standard grip to claw instantly. This transitional period is all about slowly learning claw over the next week. This means in a public match, play claw when you're looting, running around and farming, but when you get into a fight, if you feel like you're going to choke, go back to how you used to play, finish the fight, and then return to claw. But in creative and playground, religiously play claw, pressing necessary buttons you will need, so when you go back to the game, you don't choke. There's nothing worse than learning a new keybind or button bind. But we all know after a week, you pretty much have it down pat. That's the same with claw. Just be patient. Patience is absolute key when learning anything new. And the next... Which fingers press what buttons? This is something I get asked a lot. Hey Flea, which finger presses R1? Or what buttons does your index finger press? And this is where I go a little more in-depth. For me personally, my thumb stays on the analog stick, my index finger presses X, square, circle, triangle, and R1, and my middle finger presses R2. 99% of the time. 1% of the time is in rare cases in which I need to do specific tasks which involve me to have my index finger on the action buttons while pressing R1, such as jumping and placing a flat. Remember, the whole point of learning claw is keeping your thumb on the analog stick. So I could just jump and place flats like this, but I can't move in the direction I want to consistently. I have to keep taking my thumb off the analog stick. Now, I don't want to confuse you with finger swapping, because it took me a while to learn it. And I'm still practicing certain things, but I'll put them all in an advanced claw tips video for all you claw sweats that want to get sweatier. Here on screen I have a few pro players who all play claw completely different. Here's Chronic Lewis. As you can see, he uses his index finger for the action buttons, but he uses his middle finger for R1 and R2, whereas I use my index finger for R1 and middle finger for R2.
Tony plays claw.
I know a lot of players that do this, but I also know a lot of players that use their index finger for R1. So just find what works for you. Next we have Chronic Tendy, but he actually brings his ring finger up onto R2 and moves all his fingers down one. So that means his middle finger now presses R1 and his index finger presses all the shape buttons. So no fingers are rotating, he's got one finger on everything that he needs. This is a very advanced claw method, and I don't recommend starting off with this. I also find it really hard to hold the controller with just your pinky, considering every other finger is busy. So you'd have to have your hands sitting on your lap to do this method, so I don't recommend it. One thing I noticed with Tendy is that his right hand isn't hugging the controller. It's actually coming out a bit, which gives his index finger a more natural motion and makes the buttons a lot easier and pain-free to press. Unlike FaZe Swan, he has his hand hugging the controller and his index finger crunched up when pressing the buttons. There's no right or wrong way to hold the controller, it's just what works for you. In my personal experience, the more crunched up your finger is, the more pain your knuckle's gonna be in. So the more natural motion you can get pressing the buttons, the less pain you're gonna be in and the better it is gonna be for Claw. Swan also keeps his index finger on the action buttons and lets his middle finger do R1 and R2, just like Chronic Lewis. A good friend of mine, Chronic Trapped, does exactly what I do. So his index finger is on the action buttons, but also swaps up to R1 when he needs.
Just need to find a way to just press these buttons consistently. Oh,
When I bring my index finger down to the action button, it looks like this. Whereas Trapped has a bit more of a wrist rotation, once again it all comes down to what you're comfortable with and what works for you. As long as your thumb stays on the analog stick and your index finger on the action buttons, you can do whatever you want. Now we're going to be talking about pain and injury, but first here are some gameplay examples.
Should I go back to non-claw or what?
Yes.
Why?
I don't know, I feel like it's just gonna be a struggle, and then once you get used to claw, you're just gonna get used to it. And if you keep struggling with claw, you're not gonna be able to go back.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll just stop being claw.